I am a 45-year-old male who lives in a small rural community in Wyoming. I believe there are only about 6,000 people that live in my community. You would never imagine in a small town such as this one that anyone would worry about having a stalker. Or at least, I didn't think so. That was until, much to my horror, I discovered that I had one. Let me preface this by saying, until I became a published author back in 2013, I was just another friendly face in the crowd, so to speak. Granted, I am well known in my community, because I work for the local hospital and have done for many years. At the time, I was working as the reigning coordinator for the front office staff for our medical clinic as well as the hospital. Getting my first book published generated a great deal of press in my hometown and statewide. The fact that I quickly rose to a 5-star rating on Amazon only generated more press and interviews, therefore more attention. Then, when my second book was launched in 2015, all of a sudden, I was like the local celebrity. Being somewhat humble, I was appreciative that the publicity helped me sell a lot of books, but I was uncomfortable with all the attention. Local folk would just come to the hospital to have me sign their books, and this is where my stalker story began. On this particular day, I am up in our medical office building, where I was training a new hire, when a rather large biker dude with long stringy blonde hair and covered in tattoos approached the front counter where I was standing. I smiled and greeted him with a warm hello, and "How can I help you?" I was under the impression he was there to check in for an appointment. He smiled and admitted he did not have an appointment that day, but was wondering if I would autograph the copy of my books he had with him. Not wanting to be rude, I said I would be more than happy to, and had him follow me down to the end of the counter, so that we would not be in anybody's way. To be honest, I was a bit surprised he bought them, considering they were gay-themed supernatural thrillers. I guess he just did not strike me as the type of guy who would read anything that was gay-themed. Regardless, I thanked him for purchasing the books and signed them for him. He thanked me and left, and I didn't give it any more thought until a few weeks later, when he showed up at the hospital and asked me to sign 2 more books that he said he had purchased for a friend. I again thanked him and signed the books. Fast forward a few months, and I'm filling in as the receptionist for one of our other clinics in a small town about 30 miles away from my hometown. The receptionist scheduled to work had called in sick that day, and so I agreed to fill in for her. It was shortly after lunch, when guess who walks in with both my books in hand? None other than Mr. Biker. Being at work, I remained polite, and again signed his book, and he was on his way. Feeling truly creeped out and concerned, I spoke with the nurse on duty, as well as the provider, and expressed my concerns. They dismissed it as nothing other than an obvious fan who must have had a little crush on me, and nothing more. I figured they were probably right, and went about my day. The weeks went by, and I began to notice this large guy hanging out in front of my house, and in the back alley behind it. He always wore a hoodie, and so I could not see who it was. I just pointed this out to my husband, who reminded me that with the house up for sale, he was probably just someone who was either interested in buying it, or a looky-loo. Then one day, my mother, who lives right across the alley from me, called me while I was out of town on a book tour to tell me that some strange guy in a hoodie was casing my house and peering in the window. I told her it was probably a potential buyer and not to worry about it. Fast forward a few months. I am back at the medical office building in our urgent care, training another new hire, when I get a call from one of the girls in central scheduling. She tells me she has a guy on the line who keeps calling and asking for me, but refuses to identify himself or why he needs to speak to me. Thinking it was a patient that had an issue of a more sensitive nature, I told her to go ahead and patch him through. Introducing myself, I asked how I could help him. I quickly discovered he was not needing an appointment, nor did he have any medical concerns. He began telling me he was naked and jerking off. He wanted me to know he was thinking of me, and began to tell me sick and twisted things that he would do to me if he ever got me alone. I was thinking, what the hell is wrong with this guy? I was flipping the hell out by this point, but somehow still managed to keep my voice calm and informed the pervert to never call me again or I would notify the police. Unbeknownst to me, the clinic manager was standing behind me and asked me what was going on. I explained the phone call and what the creep had said, and the manager was concerned and felt we needed to notify the police immediately. I met with a few officers and explained what had happened. They asked me if I might know this person, and at the time I had no clue who it was. The next morning, I received a call from a local detective who asked me if I would stop by his office before I went to work. He said he had more information on the guy who called me the day before. I agreed to meet him and called the clinic manager to let him know what was going on, and that I would be in as soon as I was done talking with the detective. Upon reaching his office, I was invited in, and another detective got up from his desk and shut the door. He informed me that he did a search of the number the guy called from, and came up with some rather disturbing information. He went on to explain that after learning who the guy was, the detective had done some digging, including interviewing some folk that this guy associates with. What the detective told me next made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end, and sent my heart crashing into the floor. I was informed that this guy had been watching, or stalking me, for over 6 months. Not only that, but he also believed the guy had been in my house. I was shaking with fear and finding it hard to breathe. I began to pace the floor of his rather small office. I explained I don't even have a clue who this guy is or what he looks like. That's when the detective turned his computer monitor around and showed me who it was. It was Biker Dude. My blood ran cold, and I felt like I was going to pass out. When I could collect myself, I began explaining how he had been in my yard, the front and the back. He had been sitting in front of my house, on the street, and I also told him that I'd seen him walking up and down the alley between my mother's house and mine. The detective informed me this guy was a well-known gang and drug dealer from California and had been living in my hometown dealing drugs here for a year now. He told me that I needed to make sure all my doors and windows were locked at all times, and always have somebody walk with me to my vehicle, and never to go anywhere alone. He said this guy had been accused of killing witnesses in previous drug offences, and that's why he was still on the street, so to speak. Then, much to my surprise and horror, the detective asked me if I would be willing to befriend this guy and help the cops set up a drug sting operation. I was mortified and angry, to say the least. I told him I needed time to absorb all of this. My manager and the CEO of the hospital met with me when I got to work that day, and I told them everything. An organizational-wide email went out with this guy's picture, along with an alert asking that the COE, clinic manager, and I be notified if the creep was spotted in any of the facilities. We are a small hospital, so to speak, so we have no security. 2 weeks went by, and things seemed to calm down. My husband and I had went out for the evening and reminded our roommate that if he left the house to be sure all the doors were locked. We had already made him aware of the situation. He had seen the guy sitting in front of the house on several occasions, but just shrugged it off. I needed to get out for a bit, because I felt like a trapped rat. It was a great night, and for a while, I was able to forget about it. Upon returning to the house, much to my relief, the front door was still locked. I walked through the house to the back door, and it too was locked. Our roommate was sound asleep in his room, and I breathed a sigh of relief and made my way to my bedroom. As I walked into the room, I noticed my husband was reading something, and he was as white as a sheet. I asked him what was wrong, and he handed me the sheet of paper, saying that it was under my pillow. Then he got up, and I began looking in the closets and under the bed. He then went through the entire house while I read in horror. The letter said, "Hello, sexy. Nice house. I love the smell of your pillow. I hope you don't mind, but I borrowed a few of your sexy things. I will return them when I have added my own scent. Don't bother contacting the police. I know when your mother is home alone. I know your roommate's schedule, as well as your husband's. By the way, your roommate is a very sound sleeper. I'll be seeing you soon." I called the police, but they said that there was nothing they could do, since he was no longer in the house, and I couldn't prove it was him, because he never signed the note. I was shitting bricks, because I could still not figure out how he had gotten in. Another few weeks go by, and I began to realize I'm seeing him everywhere. At the grocery store, the pharmacist, I mean everywhere I went, he was always there lurking in the distance. It had gotten to the point I was now on medication to help me sleep, and antidepressants, because I felt like I was losing my mind. I couldn't function, because the cops kept saying they couldn't do anything about it, unless he harmed me or was caught in my home. Sitting in front of my house for hours, or at the end of the alley, is not illegal. This went on for over a year, where I worked a professional job, maintained my bubbly outwards appearance in public, but hid like a little timid mouse behind locked doors at night, too afraid to leave the house. About 6 months ago, my husband and I awoke to flashing lights and people hollering outside. It sounded like they were right outside on the front lawn. Peeking through the drapes, I discovered that they were. They had some guy on the ground, ordering him not to move. The fire department was there, putting out a large 15-gallon gas can that had been lit on fire and placed on my front doorstep. We threw on our robes and rushed outside, where we were met with several police officers. They had the biker guy on the ground in cuffs. One of the officers informed me that the neighbor across the street called, reporting a suspicious character lurking in my front yard, and was carrying what appeared to be a rather large gas can. The officer also pointed out that all the tires on my car had been slashed. He went on to explain that Biker Dude had placed the gas can on my front step and lit it on fire. My heart was pounding so hard in my chest, I thought I was literally going to die from a massive coronary right there. I lost it and broke down sobbing. My husband, on the other hand, blew up. He was beyond angry. I was too. But I was too overwhelmed with the fact that had my neighbours not been up and called the police, we very likely would have been dead. The Biker Dude is now behind bars. but was only sentenced to 2 years on a plea deal. The scariest thing about this is that the police nor the state are required to notify me in the event that the creep is released. I pray that me and Biker Dude do not meet again. It started when I was about 14. I met a guy at our local fair, James. He was probably 6 or 7 years older than me, but I was a rebellious teenager, and there was just something about his eyes that drew me in. Thinking back now, they just make my skin crawl. We spent the entire afternoon and evening talking and just hanging out until it was time for the fair to shut down and for us to head home. We continued talking and getting to know each other, and I just couldn't believe that this handsome older guy wanted anything to do with me. Then things started to turn. One day my parents were at work and he asked to come over. Stupidly, I agreed. We were sitting in the living room watching television, and he kept asking to see my room. I told him no repeatedly, when suddenly he took off running to find it. I stayed downstairs and pouted over him not respecting my request. He came back and sat next to me and pulled me so tightly next to him that it hurt. Then he jammed his hands between my legs and started pressing his thumb so hard into my privates. I told him that he had to stop, and he laughed at me. Thankfully, at that moment, the phone rang, and he let me go to answer, and it was my father saying that he would be home early. So fortunately for me, James left. I kept thinking about what had happened and how uneasy he made me feel, and I finally decided to cut it off. I took the easy way out and told him via MySpace messaging. Needless to say, he freaked out. He started going on about how he loved me and how I was his soulmate, and he couldn't believe I didn't want to talk to him anymore. Then he turned creepy. I'll never forget the way he sounded when he said to me, "You know, I could get into your room and nobody would never know I was there." When I told him he couldn't, because he would have to walk right past my dad, who has a bed in our living area by the stairs leading to my room due to medical issues, he laughed and said, "No, I wouldn't." I finally realized why he needed so badly to see my bedroom. Not out of curiosity, but so he could map my house. Things continued on with typical constant messages and phone calls, and finally one day I answered to tell him off. When I answered, he told me he was going to jail for unrelated reasons. I think it was a burglary charge, and I said good and hung up the phone. That's when the letters started. They continued on until I was 16. I never applied, so I was really confused when I received letters saying, "I love the poem you wrote me," and "You look beautiful in those pictures you sent me." I come to find out that his mother had been giving him letters and poems pretending to be me, and stealing my pictures off the internet and giving them to him from me. At this point I was done. I blocked his mother from everywhere and called the jail to ask to put a stop on the letters. I figured they could just throw them out when he tried sending them, but they kept me on the phone. But they walked up to his cell and said, "Hey, Andrea's on the phone and she doesn't want you to write any more letters. Got it?" So now my first thought is great, he's gonna be more angry. A few days pass, and alas, another letter from him. I open it to find pictures of myself with the words "lies" and "slut" scribbled all over my face. It was like something out of a horror movie. Oh, and I come to find out from a friend that I confided in at the time that he had been in trouble previously for bringing a knife into school and trying to kill his ex-girlfriend. So finally he leaves me alone. I constantly checked the jail website to make sure he hadn't been released. And finally, by the time I was a senior in high school, I had started to move on. Then I get to college. I lived in a single room with no roommates on a small campus near where we lived. The building was supposed to have keycard access, but usually the doors to the building were just left unlocked. One morning after a night of partying, I woke up with a friend request from you-know-who on Facebook, and my heart dropped. Then the messages began. I kept telling him to leave me alone over and over, and finally I said, "Message me again, and I'm getting a restraining order." To which he replied, "Are you serious, Andrea? Okay, fine, but I hope someday you have a change of heart, because I will always be here, and I always love you." Since then he has left me alone, besides trying to follow me on other social media accounts, where I quickly block him. Now I live 2 states away and have a beautiful family, but I am still constantly worried that my stalker is going to pop up again. So my partner and I just moved to a desert community in the American Southwest. I've always wanted to live down here, and so far, I absolutely love it. I love the quiet living on the outskirts of town, with desert to the horizon in my backyard, how friendly people are, and the stars at night, the wildlife, the space. I'm not bothered by the occasional snake, scorpion, or coyote in my backyard. But recently, I've been getting the feeling that there have been other creatures in my yard as well, even if I'm not imagining it. I don't know if this is worth doing something about, or what I can do. Allow me to explain. My partner got a lucrative job offer from a hospital here, where he covers the night shifts for his specialty at most of the local hospitals in 3 states. Small hospitals in remote areas often offer nice incentives to bring people in from larger cities. And since we were looking to move here anyway, we decided to take the position for a couple of years and see if I could find a job in my field here in the meantime. At the moment, I'm working remotely, and I stay on the night shift just to be able to see my fiancé more. We get up at around 2 to 3 p.m, and he goes to work early enough for me to run around and do any shopping and chores in the afternoon, and he gets back about 5 a.m, and we head to bed at roughly 7. It's an intense schedule, but fortunately for him, he has every other week off. So after 5 p.m, I'm home alone all day at the duplex that we rent from an elderly couple down the block. We used to have a medical resident living on the other side, but she would never talk to us and ended up moving out. Apparently, she tore the place apart, so there are contractors working on the other side of the apartment during the day most days. So I sit at the kitchen table and work during the night, occasionally going out to walk our old dog, get the mail, or to water the plants in the courtyard. The entire house is visible from the courtyard because there are windows and glass doors leading to basically every room here. The incidents that have occurred are as follows. 4 weeks ago, I went back to sleep after my partner left for work. About an hour later, at one point, I woke up and realized that my dog had been barking for an unusually long time, and he was doing his danger bark. The lawn guys and delivery folks come into our courtyard, and we had just moved in. So I figure it's something like that. Still, he knows the delivery guys are neighbours by now, and they usually leave quickly. He must have been barking for a solid 2 minutes by now. So I sit up in bed and look out into the courtyard. There's a man I don't recognise, and he's acting strange. He looks kind of like William Dafoe. He's near the front door, trying to look in the windows around the side, looking in the windows progressively further from the door. Without thinking, I call out, "I'll be right there," thinking he needs a signature or something. The guy steps back quickly, turns around, and speed walks out of the courtyard. As he does so, he gives me this extremely malevolent stare. I have never quite seen anything like it before. It startled me, because he looked right at me, dead in the eye through the window, and just looked disgusted and hateful. But during the day, you can't see through the blinds from the outside. I've checked. How did he know where I was? I admit, this even freaked me out, and may have laid the groundwork for my impressions of the potentially perfectly normal events outlined below. I flash back to this moment regularly for some reason. 3 weeks ago, strange things began to happen. My partner offers to work some extra shifts on what would normally be his week off, so I'm often home alone. A few times, I hear what I think must be one of my elderly neighbours around the side of the house, and when I go over, there's nobody there. I start to hear someone walking around the outside of the house at night. The area is surrounded by gravel, so unless someone steps slowly, you can hear things moving about. When I'm laying in bed, working on things a few times, I become acutely aware of noises just outside the bedroom window, late at night. I start checking the area with the flashlight when I go outside, and I hear bipedal footsteps on the roof multiple times during periods when the neighbours confirm that no tractors are supposed to be up there, oftentimes at night. The feeling of being watched a lot of the night begins, and I start leaving the outdoor light on all night while I'm there, especially in the courtyard. I don't take showers alone, because I sometimes hear footsteps on the roof when I'm in there, and there's a skylight over the shower. I research, buy, and install a security system and a couple of cameras in the courtyard. 2 weeks ago, this is when things got more serious. I pull into my parking space and see one of the elderly neighbours peering into my bedroom window in the afternoon. I greet him, and he says he's going around the side of the house to activate the sprinkler system that happens to have the hub on our property. Unclear if this is related, I put up opaque clings in the windows of the bedrooms to block some of the light when we're sleeping during the day. As soon as I do, I stop feeling watched from the bedroom window, but begin feeling extremely uncomfortable that my view of the courtyard is obscured. I feel better for 2 days, and the next night I start feeling watched from the living room window while I'm working, and eventually from the kitchen window specifically. That night, I have a minor panic attack and spend a lot of time in bed under the covers with my dog in the room. I don't know what the source of my discomfort was, and kept telling myself that I was being paranoid, and chalk it up to reading some creepy stuff that I had read the week before. I have to cancel an event because I'm up all day unable to sleep due to extreme anxiety. I talk at length with my partner about getting more cameras, but we don't have the money, and I'm still in denial about the reasons for my discomfort, so I drop it. Stuff in the courtyard is sometimes moved around, and I watch the cameras to figure out that the neighbour woman did it. Beer cans and other stuff are found around the property that isn't ours, but I assume it's the wind. Things related to our cars and garbage cans start being messed with, but you can see around for miles, and there aren't many people here. I hear tapping on the window and ignore it. Last week, we were travelling for part of the week. When we got back, we were in good spirits. My partner went right back to work, and my nights became predictable. Feeling good and doing things until a few hours after it gets dark, and then suddenly feeling shitty. Not wanting to do things that put me near the windows, and I decide to curl up in bed with my dog in my room, and refuse to move until my partner gets home. This has happened every night for the past week. Finally, I noticed my dog kept staring into the kitchen window, with both ears facing towards it, ignoring commands or questions for long periods of time. My very curious cat repeatedly kept trying to see if something was outside as well, especially during the night. This finally jogged me back to reality, and I realized that I feel this oppressive sensation of being watched every night, starting at 10 p.m. and continuing until dawn. It's mostly from the kitchen window, but honestly the whole house freaks me out now. There isn't really anywhere to run that doesn't have windows except for the garage or bathroom. I take my phone and a knife with me everywhere I go, and I constantly check the courtyard because every room has a door leading to it. Tonight, I took my dog out and heard someone walking towards us from the side of the house. I called out and shone the flashlight over there, but it stopped and I saw nothing. Normally I would have gone to investigate, but I had the strongest feeling that I shouldn't. This same thing happened in another location in the house that same evening. When I took the dog out yesterday around midnight, someone was coming across the field I take him to with a flashlight, and when they got near me, they shut the flashlight off, and I didn't see them after that, and they didn't respond to my calling out. I feel like I'm moving in a slow-motion horror movie, but during the day and my partner's weeks off, everything is usually fine, so I don't know what to think. I can't tell if any of this is real or not, but I don't have any close friends here. I'm planning to buy a camera and motion lights for the back when I have money next week, but I know it sounds crazy. I just don't know if it's a good idea. I think whoever it is, once I've seen them, they're going to escalate. I don't know why I think that. My partner wants me to get my concealed carry and another younger dog. This isn't known to be an unsafe area at all, but the properties are spaced pretty well. I'd love to hear your advice about this. I just don't know what to do anymore. This happened to me during my first year of university, in October. I was living in the dorms, and I need to give you a brief rundown of the dorms. You need a keycard to gain access to your specific floor. So even though someone on the 3rd and 4th floor live in the same building, they can't access each other's floors. I had injured myself playing sports, so I was under orders to rest, which meant no Halloween parties for me. Pretty sad for a horror fiend like myself, but to try and make the time a happy one, I busied myself helping make costumes for people and doing their makeup. Once I was finally finished, I packed up my makeup and decided to watch some movies in my room. A guy popped up and introduced himself. We chatted a bit, exchanged email addresses, and I walked back into my room and said goodnight. The first warning sign was that he walked into my room behind me, despite me saying I was going to walk into my room. I felt really awkward and tried to say in a roundabout way that he needed to leave, but he wasn't getting the hint. I finally had to say, "You need to leave my room now." I chalked this up to him maybe being drunk or something, but I did wonder how he even got to my floor if he wasn't with anyone partying. Before I went to bed that night, I checked my email, and there were 5 from the creep. The first being, "Hey, I'm so glad we're friends," and the rest asking why I wasn't online. A few days later, I got a knock on my door when I was studying, and it was him. I explained that I was studying and needed privacy, and he tried to walk into my room again, but I braced my arm on the frame and said firmly that I needed to study. The next day, he was at my door once more, and the next. I began pretending that I wasn't home. Another day, there was a knock on the door, and when I checked the peephole, there was no one there, and I assumed the postman had come. I opened the door, and lo and behold, it was the creepy guy. He had begun hiding from the peephole, so I would be more likely to answer the door. I told my roommate never to open the door if he were there, and I told the people living on my floor that this guy was beginning to creep me out. So if he wanted to get onto the floor, whatever sob story he gave them, don't let him on. A few days after that, I was on the bus coming home and got a text from someone who lived on my floor saying not to come home because Creep was on my floor and sitting in front of my door, just waiting. I went to a friend's house and spent the night, and when I got home, I was told that he waited for 4 hours before leaving. At this point, I was getting freaked out. A few days after that, he began waiting outside the building, and if I left, he would follow me wherever I went. I was too spineless to tell him to go away, and I tried to be more passive about it. I never spoke, and I never gave any indication I was paying attention. But he followed me to class, the cafeteria, and always tried to follow me home and get access to the floor. I went to the resident advisor, an older student that sort of watches over the floor, and told her what was going on. She spoke to the RA for his floor and was told that Creep had been telling his own RA that we were best friends and dating. My RA tried to explain that I was uncomfortable, but the other RA believed him, and that was that. Thankfully, one thing did deter him. He would never approach me if I were with a group of people. So my floor mates banded together. If I went to dinner, I went with my floor, and if I wanted to drink or seconds, someone had to come with me. Walking to class and even waiting for the bus was done in a group. He got onto my floor once when someone else was coming home, and he forced his foot in the door to let himself in. I was hidden in another room, and when he left my door to go and sit in the television lounge to wait for me, I went downstairs and ran around to the other side of the building and got in before he noticed. Then the phone calls began. I never gave him my number, but he somehow obtained my mobile and room phone, and at first it would be 1 to 2 phone calls a day, until I told him I wanted him to leave me alone. Then the calls began coming in every hour, with him begging and pleading for me to talk to him, without caller ID. I needed to answer the phone because of school and my part-time job, and at this point it was November, and I was a wreck. I was tired of having to plan out doing simple things like going for food or walking to a bus stop. Stress wasn't helping me recover from my injury, and I was losing weight and looking very sickly. I went back to the RA and begged her for help. She went to the head of dorms and explained everything that happened. I explained how far this had gone, and my roommate told them that he had followed her a few times as well, demanding that she tell him where I was. I felt awful. She never told me this because she was afraid of upsetting me further, and I felt like I was an asshole for putting her through this garbage. I don't know what went on behind closed doors. From what I guessed, he was told to leave me alone, and any further contact would result in him being kicked out of dorms. There was one email where he went insane on me, telling me how awful I was and how I could do that to him. We were so happy together. Surely I was cheating on him with other men. After that, nothing. At first, when I'd see him around campus, I would run into the ladies' toilets and hide. I'd see him around town or on campus, and he'd always just stare at me. He never tried to approach me, and never tried to get my attention. Just staring. I used to walk by and try to pretend I didn't notice him, and act like my heart wasn't pounding. My high school boyfriend, me a senior and he a junior, broke up. He was already controlling, judgmental, and abusive. I was moving on to college at the local university, and he went crazy. He lost his goddamn mind and began threatening me, sending me messages, about 200 a day. He wouldn't stop calling, showing up during my classes, showing up at my house, and broke into my car and sat in the back seat. My best friend and I had gone to the movies, came out, and I was gonna drop her off at her house, when she noticed a huge mark on the passenger side door. I looked at the back seat, and he was there, laying on the floor trying to hide. I bought a new car with new plates, and he broke into my dorm room, and then I left the dorms, because I felt unsafe, and moved into an apartment not too far from the college campus, with 2 female roommates. He found out where I was living, and broke into there too while I was in the shower. I told him to get out, and he came after me with a knife. I had to call the cops and lock myself in the bathroom. Of course, he was gone by the time they arrived. At that point, I was dating a newer guy who was an absolute gentleman, and I warned him about my psycho-stalking ex-boyfriend. My ex-boyfriend crashes in on one of our dates and jumps the new guy with 5 friends. They also end up with my face smashed in for being a cheating whore. I ended up moving back into my parents' house. My ex-boyfriend attempted to break into there at 5 o'clock in the morning on Sunday, so my entire family was home. My dad caught him and put a gun in his mouth, and that was the end of that. My dad is 6'5", ex-military, and scary, and thankfully managed to get the job done.